The encyclical, while it doesn't mention charismatic renewal, the emphases of the encyclical, the importance of praying together, for example. Praying together is strongly encouraged in Ut Unum Sint, more so than in Vatican Decree and Ecumenism, because at the time of Vatican II, the bishops who were voting for it, they had no experience of praying with other Christians, most of them. But by the time of 1995, bishops have experience of this. And so this is a move forward point, the encouragement of prayer with other Christians. And several things about Ut Unum Sint helped to change the atmosphere of this whole Catholic relating to charismatic movement. But then several other things were happening in the 1990s. One was the origins of the Alpha Course. But another thing that happened was what became known in the English-speaking world as Toronto Blessing. And this was a Pentecostal charismatic kind of outpouring of the Spirit in a non-denominational church, Vineyard Church in Toronto. This began in January 97. And this influenced quite a lot of people. Like, for example, I will mention later Matteo Calisi from Bari, but he was very influenced by Toronto. I was very influenced by it, in fact. I was very deeply blessed there. But this was like a deeper surrender to the power and unexpectedness of the Holy Spirit. And a lot of the people who Pope Francis is coming to know in the Pentecostal charismatic area were influenced by this. Now, but this has a bearing on Alpha Course as well, because one of the first centers for spreading this grace of Toronto in Britain was Holy Trinity Brompton, the home of the Alpha Course. And in fact, it was through this Toronto connection that lots of other Christians from out, and also other Anglicans, all started to go to Holy Trinity Brompton. It became a center of attraction because of this Toronto element. But that was what then led to the Alpha Course being exported from their church and not being just a course they developed for their own people, but being marketed for evangelistic work all over the world in all kinds of churches and denominations. So, and this has had a big influence in spreading a more ecumenical approach to renewal. That for this whole suspicion of ecumenical element in the charismatic movement, this helped to kill this off. And so you find with the city mission in Vienna, Cardinal Sherman has Nicky Gumbel from Holy Trinity Brompton here doing workshops and so on. And
Cardinal Schönborn being invited to speak at the Alpha Conference in London.
Yes. And another, you see, they have a very close relationship with Father Raniero Cantalamessa at Holy Trinity Brompton. So these things were all changing the atmosphere and preparing the way for what Pope Francis is doing. Another thing that was happening was there was increasing concern at the World Council of Churches that the World Council was becoming less representative of the world's Christians, because the part of the world Christianity that was growing fast was Pentecostal charismatic, and a lot of them were not involved in the World Council, and evangelical, and many of the churches that were involved in the World Council were those suffering decline, like Protestant churches in Europe and North America. So who counts as charismatic? You'll get different figures depending on who. And also, you see, with the Pentecostals basically form new denominations. And denominations have membership lists. You know, the denominations have official statistics. The Charismatic Renewal in the Protestant churches and in the Catholic Church does not have membership. You know, when you're a charismatic because you're baptized in the Spirit. There's no, you know, the number of baptized Catholics, you've got statistics. Or you also have how many people are attending Mass. But there are no way of comparable statistics, like who counts as a charismatic Catholic. There's no measure of it. It's all, well, there are people who've done surveys and so on, but this makes the gathering of statistics much more difficult. But it's clear that the influence on world Christianity is very considerable. Now, but what I'm saying, what happened then was, out of all this, there were people who said this gap between the Pentecostals and evangelicals and the ecumenical churches has to be bridged. There have to be ways. And so out of this has come something called the Global Christian Forum, in which they gather people from every kind of church and background, and they, within the Global Christian Forum, they have a rule that it has to be, half the people have to be from Pentecostal and evangelical backgrounds. And they also they realized they could not operate this on the basis like ecumenical meetings, which are strongly theological, but they had to begin on a much more personal relationship to Jesus, openness to Holy Spirit basis. And you see, and this fits with the direction that the charismatic ecumenism has, renewal in the spirit ecumenism has been taking, because it's much more, and here we see thing of Pope Francis. Now, another important element in the 90s, around those early 90s, was there'd been a friendship between two Italians, a Catholic, Matteo Calisi, leader of community, and a Pentecostal pastor, Giovanni Traitino. And they had known each other for 10 years or so, when in early 90s they started something called the Evangelical Catholic Consultation, something like this, in Italy. So they started an annual meeting of Catholics and Pentecostals and charismatic evangelicals in Italy. And this continued for several years. It still continues some way, but then they started doing more things ecumenically, Matteo Calisi and Giovanni Traitino. But why this is so important is that this community, which is totally Catholic community, but with many ecumenical friends and relationships in Bari. And now today, the Comunità di Gesù in Bari has daughter communities in some other countries. But the first place where there was a daughter community, Comunità di Gesù, linked to Bari, was Buenos Aires. Since then, they've also got community in Albania and a community in Angola in Africa. But in Buenos Aires, it started with Matteo Calisi visiting Buenos Aires in 2003. And he was introduced by the woman who became a leader in Comunità di Gesù in Buenos Aires, Julia Torres. She introduced him to Cardinal Bergoglio. And then a year or two after that, well, Matteo Calisi and a Pentecostal pastor, Jorge Jiménez, in Buenos Aires, they started a thing called Catholics and Creces, C-R-E-C-E-S. It's Catholics and evangelicals together in the Holy Spirit, something like that. Okay. And they have meetings. They started meetings in Argentina in 2004. And the Archbishop came to each one, but he just sat in the crowd. But in 2006, at their meeting, they had a bigger meeting in a stadium, and one of the speakers was Raniero Cantalamessa. But also, Pastor Giovanni Traetino was there, and he was introduced to Cardinal Bergoglio. And so this was all very significant in view of what would happen when Cardinal Bergoglio was elected to be Bishop of Rome, because he knew these people, and friendship is very important for Pope Francis. And this relationship, a relational ecumenism, you know, the people that he started to invite, Pope Francis, to meet with him in the Vatican from the Pentecostal charismatic world were people introduced to him by Matteo Calisi, Leo Torres, and Giovanni Traetino. And then, of course, in July 14, Pope Francis visits the Pentecostal church of Giovanni Traetino in Caserta. And this was a big breakthrough because in the Catholic world, in Italy, like in Austria, Pentecost was seen as a sect. So the Pope goes to the sect, you know. It was sort of a big shock. And
I think it was a visit to an old friend.
Yes, and he described it as visiting a friend. And he constantly talks about my friend Giovanni, il mio amico Giovanni. And last year there was a meeting of about 100 pastors in the Vatican that were all invited by Giovanni. And what was so interesting was, if you can see this on YouTube and so on, or Facebook, if you enter in Pope Francis and Pentecostals, you'll probably get a picture of this.
You get some wonderful pictures of friends celebrating unity.
Yes, and see, what's so interesting about this meeting is that it's not the usual kind of papal audience where the Pope is sitting on his own and everyone else is in front of him, and somebody speaks for them, the Pope gives them an address, at the end he gives them his blessing and so on. This was a meeting jointly hosted by Pastor Giovanni and Pope Francis, and they are together at the front, side by side. And this is totally different from all traditional Vatican protocol.
Pope Francis took this even one step further when he asked for forgiveness of the persecution of Pentecostals by the Catholic Church, in particular during the fascist era.
He did that when he visited this church, Pentecostal church in Caserta in July 14. He also did the same, asking forgiveness, when he visited the Waldensians in Turin in June 15.
Caro Papa Francesco, caro fratelli in Cristo, i valdesi del ramo italiano da me rappresentati, i metodisti qui rappresentati dalla presidente Alessandra Trotta e i rappresentanti delle chiese evangeliche sorelle, luterane, battiste, avventiste e salutiste che sono con noi. Di fronte a noi, anche lì fuori, c'è un mondo inquieto, sofferente, pieno di tensioni, ed è il nostro vero mandato ecumenico. Caro Papa Francesco, grazie per essere tra noi e con noi. Dio illumini e benedica il suo servizio.
Vi saluto tutti con le parole dell'Apostolo Paolo. A voi che siete di Dio Padre e del Signore Gesù Cristo, noi auguriamo grazia e pace. Uno dei principali frutti che il movimento ecumenico ha già permesso di raccogliere in questi anni è la riscoperta della fraternità che unisce tutti coloro che credono in Gesù Cristo e sono stati battezzati nel suo nome. Questo legame non è basato su criteri semplicemente umani, ma sulla radicale condivisione dell'esperienza fondante della vita cristiana, l'incontro con l'amore di Dio che si rivela a noi in Gesù Cristo e l'azione trasformante dello Spirito Santo che ci assiste nel cammino della vita. La riscoperta di tale fraternità ci consente di cogliere il profondo legame che già ci unisce, malgrado le nostre differenze. Si tratta di una comunione ancora in cammino e l'unità si fa in cammino. Una comunione che con la preghiera, con la continua conversione personale e comunitaria e con l'aiuto dei teologi, noi speriamo, fiduciosi nell'azione dello Spirito Santo, possa diventare piena e visibile comunione nella verità e nella carità. Riflettendo sulla storia delle nostre relazioni, non possiamo che rattristarci di fronte alle conteste e alle violenze commesse in nome della propria fede. E chiedo al Signore ci dia la grazia di riconoscerci tutti peccatori e di saperci perdonare gli uni agli altri. È per iniziativa di Dio, il quale non si rassegna mai di fronte al peccato dell'uomo, che si aprono nuove strade per vivere la nostra fraternità e a questo non possiamo sottrarci. Da parte della Chiesa Cattolica vi chiedo perdono. Vi chiedo perdono per gli atteggiamenti e i comportamenti non cristiani, persino non umani, che nella storia abbiamo avuto contro di voi. In nome del Signore Gesù Cristo, perdonateci. Se camminiamo insieme, il Signore ci aiuta a vivere quella comunione che precede ogni contrasto. Cari fratelli e sorelle, vi ringrazio nuovamente per questo incontro che vorrei ci confermasse in un nuovo modo di essere gli uni con gli altri, guardando prima di tutto la grandezza della nostra fede comune e della nostra vita in Cristo e nello Spirito Santo, e soltanto dopo le divergenze che ancora sussistono. Vi assicuro del mio ricordo nella preghiera e vi chiedo per favore di pregare per me. Ne ho bisogno.
One of the things Francis has been, so he was prayed over by 5 leading Pentecostal pastors in Buenos Aires at this meeting in 2006. And I think at this point, he's really, he experiences himself what this is all about. So he's really speaking is from within the movement. And so Pope Francis, when he becomes Pope, when he meets with the Renewal, and he's had several important meetings with leaders of Renewal, he has made several points that have not been made by previous popes. First of all, he uses the term baptism in the Holy Spirit, which none of the previous popes used that term specifically for in the way charismatics use it, because it was felt all these arguments about it as danger of confusion with the sacrament of baptism. Francis doesn't have he talks about baptism in the Holy Spirit. And not only that, he says for the first time, your task is to spread this to the whole church. This is also totally new. You know, before it's welcomed, it's a grace, it's a blessing, we receive it in the Catholic Church, but not something for everybody. And now Francis says, spread this to the whole church. But then Francis also, he says this is a current of grace. He says it's not a movement. This is important. He said it's a current of grace.
Meaning it's not confined to one group of people, it's for the whole church.
Yes, but it's not something that you belong to. It doesn't have membership, you see. He hasn't said that. But he says, he's used the phrase of it's a sovereign work of God's grace, this sort of language, which people in the Renewal have believed from the beginning, but it was not used by the Pope speaking of the Renewal. And then he's spoken about this outpouring, this current of grace is inherently ecumenical. See, which is exactly this point that there was all the hesitation about from earlier on in the 80s and so on. And now Pope Francis is saying clearly it's inherently ecumenical. Now, of course, this is a huge challenge to a lot of the Catholic Charismatic Renewal, which is not very ecumenical. And they've got, it's going to be, now, this challenge is going to be very evident next year in Rome, because the Pope himself invited the Renewal to come and celebrate 50 years since 1967 with him in Rome. So it's an invitation from the Pope. There have been previous things before where the Renewal wants to go to Rome, they ask the Pope for the blessing and so on. This is an invitation of the Pope. Now, one of the things, you know, there was a meeting with the Pope audience last week, Monday or Tuesday last week. And I've been sent a photo of it and news about it. But you see, I was told this last year by Julia Torres in Rome, who's very close to Pope Francis. She said the Pope does not want a big Catholic congratulatory celebration. He wants this to be totally ecumenical celebration next year that is celebrating this current of grace poured out on all the churches. But the occasion of it is 50 years of Catholic Charismatic Renewal. But he's not just wanting it to be a Catholic celebration of 50 years of Catholic Charismatic Renewal. And he said this to this group very clearly last week. He said this, what this is to be. But you see, if you read the accounts in Catholic charismatic journals and newsletters and so on of what the leaders are saying after the Pope gives this invitation, they all think it's a Catholic celebration of Catholic 50 years of Catholic Charismatic Renewal. And the Pope is saying this is what it's not to be just that. And so this group last week, the Pope has been speaking to leaders about this, and he's trying to stop it being just a Catholic celebration only. And this isn't very easy because so many of these people, they're not used to thinking this way, most of the Catholic Charismatic leaders.
It's still the old mindset.
Yes. And you see, also, Catholic leaders were very loyal to the Pope and the Holy See because, you know, they wanted to show we are trustworthy Catholics, we're not crazy. And so when the popes don't encourage the ecumenical dimension, a lot of them, only those emphasize the ecumenical dimension who have this deeply on their heart from the Lord. But a lot of the others, it's not part of the way they think. And so this will be a big challenge for next year. But I haven't seen any reports of this meeting. I've just read what I got in an email from one of the people who was there. And I got a photo of it. But the Pope was repeating again that this is not to be just a Catholic celebration. And also the Pope, you know, he talks about surprise of the Spirit. It's clear from what the Pope said to this meeting last week that he's expecting something remarkable to happen at Pentecost next year. He thinks this is going to be a major sort of spirit event for the Church.
So we're full of expectation.
Yes. And
Father Peter Hocken, Sie haben ja Kardinal Bergoglio getroffen, einen Monat bevor er zur Konklave nach Rom gefahren ist, haben auch gebetet für das Konklave, ohne zu wissen, dass er der nächste Papst werden würde. Seine ökumenischen Standpunkte waren damals ja recht klar. Sind sie auch den Kardinalskollegen so klar geworden? Wollten die Kanäle einen solchen ökumenischen Papst haben, wie er sich jetzt darstellt?
No, I think most of the cardinals did not have a knowledge of many aspects of Cardinal Bergoglio. I think they had a very positive impression of him because he had a reputation for integrity and for being a very spiritual man and being a strong man. And of course, at the time of the conclave in 2013, a major issue was all the dossier on the scandals in the Vatican, VatiLeaks and finance of Vatican, that dossier that had been prepared for Pope Benedict, which he knew that he didn't have the energy to handle. And so the cardinals, when they met before the conclave, this was one of the big things, that there has to be a cleaning up of things in the Vatican. And I think they were focused above all on who is a strong, really honest, spiritual man who's capable of doing the things that are necessary. And I think this was the dominant thing that led them to Bergoglio. But there were many other things about Bergoglio they didn't know about. But I think before I went to Buenos Aires that time, I knew that Cardinal Schönborn had a high respect for Cardinal Bergoglio. And, you know, I heard him say this once, that he had a very high respect for him. And it's obvious now that Cardinal Schönborn has become one of the key cardinals in this pontificate, because, like the fact that he was invited to give the speech 50 years of synod, and then that he's invited to be other speaker besides the secretary of the synod at the press conference for the letter Amoris Laetitia on family and married life. You know, that I think he's highly trusted. But also, Cardinal Schönborn is on the same wavelength. What we're able to live today with Pope Francis encouraging the renewal and not just seeing it as one of a number of good things, but seeing it as a special grace for our time, of his saying baptism of spirits for whole church, of saying it's inherently ecumenical. This is really the renewal as God gave it, being really received at the center of the Catholic Church. And the problem earlier with this renewal moving to the heart of the church was that it meant a sort of reduced version of renewal that's purified of ecumenical elements being received in Rome. And this was a mixed thing, that there were good aspects to that moving to the center of the church, but there were also bad aspects, because was what was moving to the heart of the church the renewal as God was giving it? And I think what was moving to the heart of the church was the renewal as less than what God was giving, and that what's happening now is that Pope Francis is welcoming this renewal in the way that God gave it, which was ecumenical, which was open to the full surprises of the Holy Spirit, with a view of following the Spirit, being obedient to the Spirit, that's not fearful, and that is that's really open to all the surprises of the Spirit. And so that's what's being received into the heart of the church now. That's very good.